I first became interested in archaeology thanks to my father, who was a college professor, and he had a sabbatical year when I was 10 years old, and we went throughout Europe and the Middle East, visiting many archaeological sites and museums, and I just got hooked. I would gather a pebble or a snail, and then I'd get the postcard, and I'd mark down where I'd found this, and I had a little notebook, and I don't know where I learned this at 10 years old, but clearly I already had it in my genes to be what I grew up to be. And my parents were great. They were very supportive, and they were very happy for me to do archaeology, first at McGill University in Montreal, and then to move on to California, to University of California at Berkeley. Where I went to both of these places because actually they were for financial reasons. They were both cheap at the time, which was great because I did the very long sort of higher education route. I think I did the 17-year plan. But I finally did finish, thank goodness. But I had a wonderful time at Berkeley, which is why it took me so long. So I was able to teach there, which was very stimulating, obviously, to teach people. And also because of the Lowy Museum, what is now the Hearst, which was just a marvelous opportunity to interact with real excavated material, so much of it unpublished at the time, and just beginning to be conserved. So that was, I mean, you can't beat that. I mean, that was a wonderful opportunity for me. And it was because of that that I picked my master's thesis topic. At the time, they were just beginning to conserve the pottery from the Predynastic Cemetery at Naga Adair. And we would all go out every weekend to a storage facility they had in Richmond, out by an old Ford factory that had been abandoned and given to the university, where the stuff was being soaked to be desalted, and then we would mend it. And I realized this is an incredible opportunity. It hadn't been fully described in the publication. So, and at that point in time, of course, pottery and chronology was the big deal. So it was a wonderful opportunity since they had all the notes from the excavations as well. So that got me started in Predynastic, because before that I was much more interested in Bronze Age. But never mind. And then I went earlier and earlier and earlier, and I ended up kind of a Predynastic born and bred person. So on the back of all my Predynastic work, of course, I became fascinated with the site of Hierakonpolis, which at that time was just starting to be explored by Mike Hoffman. And I was very fortunate because I was in Egypt. I was spending 2 years in Cairo teaching English and also teaching at AUC and doing other things. And Anne Roth was invited to go down to Hierakonpolis to look at some hieroglyphic inscriptions they had found. And she mentioned this to me, and I said, oh, I have to go with you. You can't go by yourself. I mean, especially in the 1980s, it actually wasn't great for a woman to travel by herself in Egypt. And at that point, of course, in Egypt, you didn't need security clearance. You could just go. So I said, well, I'll go down, and if I'm not welcome, I'll catch a service taxi and I'll leave. But I have to go there with you. So we went down, and of course I went there, and it was like I was coming home. I went down for a day, I stayed for a week. And Mike wasn't there at the time. I had to go and present myself to Mike at his home in Colonial Beach, Virginia. And that's where actually I met Barbara Adams for the first time because she was visiting. So that's how it all came together. A freak invitation to look at some hieroglyphic inscriptions, and then everything fell into place. And then I worked with Mike. I went out with Mike in 1983, so it's now been 40 years. I've been working at Hierakonpolis. That's how I got there. So I was very fortunate to work with Michael Hoffman for several years, excavating the ceremonial center at HK29A. And I was pot girl. I presented that, having worked on the Nagadare pottery, that made me pot girl. And that's what I ended up doing my PhD on, was, what was it? 250,000 potsherds that I counted, sat in the sherd yard counting. And then I was very fortunate to have other samples from Nagada and from Hamamia to compare. Anyway, that's how I did. That was my PhD thesis, came out of Hierakonpolis. And unfortunately, of course, Mike passed away during the middle of that research. And there was a real hiatus in the expedition, during which time I went and did some other work. I worked in Mandes for a while, for a couple of years, and also started to work at Tell Muqdam with Carol Redmount. But I didn't like the Delta, I have to say. I'm an Upper Egyptian girl. So at the first possible opportunity, we headed back, Barbara Adams and I, after Mike's death. We started the expedition in 1996 as co-directors. So, and that's where I've been ever since. So we're almost 30 years of directing the site as well. Oh, how did that happen? So when we first restarted the expedition, Barbara and I, Mike had started building a dig house, which he was sadly unable to see completed, and it had just been abandoned, pretty much upon his death, half finished. So we raised the money and started finishing it. We were the first people to have solar power in Upper Egypt, because the house is set back in the desert, and we couldn't get it wired up. And we were also told if you wired it with electricity, the village will come with you. Yeah, if you want to keep your site safe, you can't put in these mod cons. So we still have solar power, and it's been working great, I have to say. I mean, Egypt, it should, right? So it's a nice big house, and it's been very comfortable for us. It's been a great 8 Hoffman, we call it Hoffman House. It's been a wonderful place full of memories now. I've had a lot of people come through over the years. So when we first went out, we restarted again. When we arrived on the site, it had all been pegged out for cultivation, except for the fort. Every part of it was already parceled into land segments for people. And we jumped up and down a lot, and thank goodness, we had very, very supportive EDFU, Antiquities Service, who really did go to bat for us, and we were able to save it. We were the first site since the 1950s, the first desert site since the 1950s that was declared an antiquities land. Because they never bothered back then to officially designate the desert sites, because nobody ever conceived of the technology that would make them useful again. So there's this huge land reclamation project behind us, which is now really starting to cause us problems. But we were able to put an end to it at that point, or minimize the damage. But it did mean that there were areas that were in danger that we had to deal with. So I went off to what we call the Workmen's Cemetery, HK43, which is on the far southern border, because that had a massive canal being dug through the center of it. Barbara went to HK6 to the Elite Cemetery, and at that point in time we were each spending 3 months a year there, so we had a full 6 months of expedition. I went for 3, Barbara went for 3. We didn't overlap, but we had a major presence there at the time to try to stop further incursions on the site and protect it. So, you know, it was a big commitment of time and effort for both of us. And then, of course, Barbara became ill after 3 years and subsequently passed away. So I had to take over her part with much trepidation because the elite cemetery was quite something. And I had, of course, started to work on so many other things. So we have our Nubian component of the site, which we had begun looking into, what we thought were Pangrave cemeteries. One of them turned out to be C group, the northernmost C group cemetery, and one of the last surviving ones ever anywhere since Nubia was flooded. And that's been an amazing piece of work. You know, we continued to work at the Ceremonial Center, HK29A, because Mike hadn't been able to finish that. With my colleagues from Japan, we started looking at the breweries. So it was a very busy time. The house was full. Thank goodness it sleeps 14. And we found some wonderful things, as I think many people know. Since 2002, I have been working at HK6, the Elite Cemetery, where we have been very fortunate to find an amazing amount of animals. We already knew that there would be some weird animals there. We already knew that there was going to be an elephant because Barbara found part of it. And Mike had already found baboons. But we really didn't expect now, whatever it is, 20 years later, that we have 175 animals buried in that cemetery. That's our total so far. And I'm sure it will continue to grow. 45 of which are wild. So now we have 2 elephants. Barbara found one, I found another. Something like 20 baboons, a leopard, 2 crocodiles, 4 hippos, an ostrich. It's just an amazing amount of animals. It's always Barbary sheep and a hartebeest. Yes, that I think that's all of them. And they're all just so fascinating. And then we have the little flint figurines that seem to mirror them. So it all is. You have to put a lot of work to make sense of all of this. But having done it, it's starting to make sense how it all fits together in these large complexes with the main tomb surrounded by these animals and then surrounded by the humans. So the chiefs of Hierakonpolis were pretty, I would say, ostentatious. It's like I walk around town with my elephant, meet my elephant, the real royal menageries. So another surprising thing about HK6, about the Elite Cemetery, is the amount of above-ground architecture we have, which has not been found at any other site. And part of this was due to the fact that we do wide area clearance as if it was a settlement. So we are looking for these things, not just for the tomb shaft. But there's just so many little posts with the posts still in them. It's really amazing how much of the organics have survived. We have our pillared halls. So we have the earliest funerary temples in Egypt that were basically hypostyle halls, but we still have the posts. And even along the bottoms, you can see where strips of cedar have been put up against them in a lattice pattern. So there's kind of cedar veneered already at 3700 BC. And we have been able to get good carbon-14 dates on them. We also know that they were covered in colorful plaster because we find them fallen over with, when you can see the outlines of the impressions of the posts on the back. So you know this was on a wall. And we have red, green, figural decorations, stripes. I mean, the decorated mastabas you'll see later really do harken back to an earlier prototype. that seems to be at Hierakonpolis. I'm sure there were at other places. It was just it's a matter of looking for it, I think. Plus, we are blessed with great organic preservation there, or were, till all this drainage from this land reclamation is starting to kill us, unfortunately. So we have found a lot of architecture at Hierakonpolis, but of course it's all negative features. We can pretty much only tell it from the posthole that's left behind, except for our one standing monument, our mud brick enclosure Khasahemwi, which is the oldest freestanding mud brick structure in the world, still standing to its original height, because it is older than the Shunit at Abydos. And being old, it needs a lot of help. And so that's where we've been directing a lot of our conservation work at present, is trying to keep it standing up. We had a big project thanks to World Monuments Fund running from 2004 to 2010, where we fixed the most critically endangered areas, because it's been standing for a long time. And now we're finally dealing with one corner that, because they're built in stacked headers, it really needs the corners to hold the walls together, because there's no bonding laterally. So we're now 80,000 bricks investment in rebuilding this corner. So that's keeping us busy of late. And we're also investigating the internal structure inside and starting to cap those walls, so they should have a better feel for what the structure was about, since it really is only ours and the Shunit at Abydos that are still standing. So it really is important that we do conserve them as best we can. So I've been told that I've been a pioneer on putting our material up on the internet. I don't consider myself that, but that all came about from Archaeology magazine. That was an initiative that they asked us to do. We had a small grant from them to continue the excavations at the ceremonial center, and they said, okay, but can you put up something online for this Archaeology Interactive, I think they called it at the time. And it was a lot of work, I have to say. It was interesting, and it was fun, because it did make you think about what you were finding as you were finding it. You know, making a story and figuring out, not just finding it and going, I don't know what it means. It's, you know, in real time thinking about how does it fit together. And it did help direct where you would look, because, oh, I really don't know if that works, you know. But it wasn't a blog. I mean, it wasn't, as at the time a lot of people were just, you know, today I woke up and had a croissant sort of thing. It was a lot of work, and at a certain point I'd had enough of that, which is when we stopped and we developed our own website, because we were deriving actually no benefit otherwise. And of course, you know, doing that and then putting up the Nehen News every year. So it was a lot of work, and it still is a lot of work. But the Nehen News is, to say, I am very proud of it as a way of getting stuff out quickly for people, and again, as a way of keeping track in your own mind of what you're finding and how your story is developing. And if what you're, you know, because it has no references, you have to have an opinion. You can't just footnote, and so said this and so said that. You have to decide what you think it is. And then the next year you have to go out and prove that it is what you said it was. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. But I think it's also important for people to see, essentially in real time, what it takes. We don't know the answers. I mean, it's an incremental. We learn every year. It's our best guess. We test it. Sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong. So I hope people are getting that from it, and also the excitement of it. You know, it is brand new, so much of this stuff. And particularly at Hierakonpolis, there's not a lot of parallels. So it's like, you know, what does it mean? Well, I don't know. What do you think it means? You know, we just kind of make it up as we go along and hope that it, you know, at the end of the day, it's true. As an offshoot of Hierakonpolis, I've now gotten into tattoos, but that's totally by accident. When we started doing our Nubian cemetery at HK27C, in 2003, we excavated one tomb where you could see the tattoos with the naked eye. I mean, it was really quite remarkable to see these tattoos on this woman. And then, you know, reading about it, you realize that through infrared, you can see them even better. So we got an infrared camera, and we realized we had more than just one tattooed lady. We had two others, which honestly you couldn't see. Without infrared, you couldn't see them at all. So that was very exciting. So now I have this little infrared camera, and everywhere I go, I point it at things. And I have, and that's how I discovered the tattoo on Jebel Man in the British Museum. I just had my camera. I went, oh, I wonder what's that? Oh my gosh. And to think that that had been sitting in the museum on display for 100 years. It really just looks like a smudge on his arm. But under infrared, it's like, oh, that was pretty amazing. And since that time, we found actually 5 more bodies with tattoos. So that's been a lot of fun. So that's my non-Hierakonpolis thing that I do. It gets me going. So you know about the tattoos that have already been published. It's a Barbary sheep and a longhorn, an aurochs, a longhorn cattle on Jebel Man on his shoulder. Jebel woman had these S motifs and a staff. I don't know what those are. But on another woman, on her belly, just exactly where they are on the figurines, we have a hippo and a lion, little hippo. So those figurines, yeah, they are tattoos, and people are being tattooed like the figurines. The other ones, we got another Barbary sheep on the back shoulder of a guy. So just like the figurines. You know, where Darnell says the Barbary sheep on the back of the men and the hippos on the front of the women. He sees them as these figurines as being mediating these dualities. But it does look like it's actually true. Which is kind of cool. So we should be getting that out this summer too, I hope. Of course, Hierakonpolis is a site that keeps on giving, right? So we have all sorts of different angles going. We have, of course, the beer, all the breweries. We've been doing analysis on those. And also this residue analysis on the pottery, so we can see what we were calling beer jars. In fact, thank goodness they're beer jars. They did contain beer. And also the little blacktop beakers now are also containing beer. So it's really nice to start to see how the pottery works and what it means and what it meant to them. And also for some of the tomb kits, what they're outfitting people with, and for their ideas of what their afterlife is going to be. There seems to be a lot of beer. Other things we're working on, other than the beer, and the Nubian cemeteries, and the Pangrave cemeteries, and the animals. Yeah, that keeps us pretty busy. I'm sure there's other things, I just can't remember what they are. Oh, right now we're working on baboons. Baboons are our latest. So we have, we're going to try to do some stable isotope and some DNA studies with our Egyptian colleagues to see if we can find out where the baboons come from, because they're not native to Egypt, and they may come as far away as Ethiopia or Yemen. So that'll be exciting to look at these trade routes, and also where the elephants are coming from, because they weren't in the Nile Valley then either. So all sorts of things, plenty of things to keep me busy for the rest of the time I have. Mike had found some elephant teeth on the surface when they were doing their first reconnaissance in the 79, 80, which he took out in that study sample. So that's been great. And also some of the baboon bones as well. So that's been great because then we can, we have access to studying them. And we'll do the others, the ones that are in Egypt, with our Egyptian colleagues, which would be a good test for everyone to see how things are working. Well, I hope to continue working at Hierakonpolis till they carry me out of there. In future, now that so many scientific tests are becoming available in Egypt, I think it's going to be a really exciting time. There are things we're going to be able to learn from things that we've already excavated, and I think it will also help direct where we want to excavate. It'll give us new questions. We know that Egypt is full of wonderful things, but directing certain questions so that we can get some definitive answers, particularly about trade routes and just the sophistication of the pre-dynastic and the early dynastic, and the events that led up to the creation of the world's first territorial state. So I think it's going to be a very exciting time coming up. I think there's a lot of new opportunities coming.